Howdy, howdy. It's Scott again, back to talk about part two of L'Aventure Ambigüe by Sheikh Hamidou Kane. Samba has now left Africa and he is well into his time in France where he is studying philosophy. There's a girl that he likes. Her name is Lucienne. And the first chapter of the second part of the book, the second half of the book, has Samba visiting Lucien's parents for lunch one day and her cousin Pierre. And I'm just gonna get right into it. So, jumping in mid-conversation, the Samba has been asked by Lucien's cousin Pierre about some of his philosophy studies. It seems to me that the history of Western thought suffered an accident that deformed it and ultimately threw it from its project. Do you understand what I mean? At base, Socrates' project doesn't appear to me different from St. Augustine's. Even though there's Christ in between them, that project is the same up until Pascal. It's still the project of all non-Western thought. Don't you feel that the philosophical project is no longer quite the same for Pascal as it is for Descartes? It's not that they're concerned with different problems. But that they deal with those problems differently. It's not the mystery that has changed, but the questions that are posed to it and the answers one expects. Descartes is more parsimonious in his quest. If indeed, thanks to his modesty, as well as to his method, he obtains more answers, that which he contributes also concerns us less, and is a little help to us, don't you think so? So I want to share one paragraph from Descartes' Wikipedia page. I'm not as versed in philosophy as, indeed, probably Samba is at this point. But I found this bit helpful. Descartes has often been dubbed the father of modern Western philosophy, the thinker whose approach has profoundly changed the course of Western philosophy and set the basis for modernity. The first two of his meditations on first philosophy, those that formulate the famous methodic doubt, represent the portion of Descartes' writing that most influenced modern thinking. It has been argued that Descartes himself did not realize the extent of this revolutionary move. In shifting the debate from what is true to of what can I be certain, Descartes arguably shifted the authoritative guarantor of truth from God to humanity, even though Descartes himself claimed he received his visions from God. While the traditional concept of truth implies an external authority, certainty instead relies on the judgment of the individual. And so Descartes is obviously most famous for his cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. He was interested in what he could be certain of, as that passage said. And in that case, reason for him was his essential, fundamental, highest tool for pursuing knowledge, as opposed to tradition, authority, revelation, and so on. And as such, what was that? Yeah. In an anthropocentric revolution, the human being is now raised to the level of a subject, an agent, an emanciated being equipped with autonomous reason. This was a revolutionary step that established the basis of modernity, the repercussions of which are still being felt. The emancipation of humanity from Christian revelational truth and church doctrine, humanity making its own law and taking its own stand. And so Descartes is the beginning of the shift in Western philosophy, which ultimately went from man before Descartes, while being less technologically superior, less fruitful in terms of his material output, was understood to be the union of heaven and earth, the dust of earth and the breath of God. And Descartes was the beginning of the switch that made man the center of the universe, and so rather ultimately demoted him. While before Descartes, man's on the bottom. I think I mentioned this some in the early episodes, but before Descartes, man is the lowest of spiritual beings. He is below the angels, he's below God Almighty, but he is himself participating in the life of heaven. Whereas after Descartes, man becomes the center and is ultimately demoted to being on top, but only an intelligent primate. So I think this is what Samba is driving at. The pursuit of wisdom in Western philosophy was as a project, was distinctly shifted after Descartes and into modernity. And that's when it left the old world that Samba comes from and created a brave new world. Pierre responded with only a doubtful pout. The pastor smiled. The pastor again is Lucien's father. The pastor says, "Hold firm to your opinion, even if you feel you've not sufficiently supported it. It constitutes a line of demarcation, and those on your side diminish daily. Moreover, as those on the other side succeed in accumulating partial answers, they give those on your side a guilty conscience." Yeah. The modernist can say, we've got a steam engine, What have you got? We've got laptops. What have you come up with? 1,600 years of Christian history without the sort of technological development that we're seeing, decade by decade, if not more quickly. And of course, I suppose the traditional religious teacher can respond, well, we have intact families and non-plummeting birth rates and meaning to our life and moral compass. But those things are not as compelling as the material progress and comforts, perhaps, that have driven recent history. Mrs. Martial entered and called the men to table. Should I do a French accent for the Martials? Probably won't keep it up, but I'll do it for fun. The pastor, who was getting ready to bless the meal, noted that Samba Diallo had preceded him in prayer. The young man had gathered himself for a brief moment and murmured imperceptibly. They began to eat. Lucien turned to Samba Diallo. Dad nearly started his ministry in Africa. Has he not told you yet? Probably shouldn't do that. Oh, Samba Diallo inquired, looking back and forth at the pastor and his daughter. "C'est ancient history," Mr. Martial responded with a touch of melancholy. "I dreamed of founding a mission that would have been in Africa, in search of a country where no military, no doctor, good or bad, had come before us." I'm going to drop it. It's probably hard to understand. We were to present ourselves, equipped with God's only book, our task being to evangelize. I would have avoided bringing even the least cumbersome and most useful medicine. I wanted the revelation of which we were the messengers to owe nothing to any but itself, and to be literally for us an imitation of Jesus Christ. Moreover, I was not only expecting the edification of those whom we would have converted. I was counting on, with God's help, the example of your faith serving to revive ours, that the black church that we would have set off would very quickly take the baton in our fight for the faith. When I opened up about this project to my superiors, they wasted no time in showing me the naivete of it all. This is even today the desire of a whole lot of frontier missions, to go where people have not been reached by military, medical, or any other kind of colonization, just to go forward with the Word of God. So what's Samba's opinion? When he fell silent, Samba Diallo had the impression that he had hastened to abridge the evocation of his old dream. He hasn't told me everything, he thought. Neither that his superiors failed to convince him, although he submitted, nor what a great debate must have divided him from himself. And Samba says, "I can say for my part that it is infinitely regrettable that no one followed you," he said to the pastor. "Huh? Do you really think it was more urgent to send you pastors than doctors?" Lucien asked. "Yes. If in that way you're proposing a choice between faith and the health of the body," answered Samba Diallo, you should be thankful that you were only talking about... You should be thankful that we're only talking about a hypothetical here, Lucien said. I am sure that destiny could have presented you with that choice. It has presented me with that choice. It proposes it to me still, presently. My country is dying for not daring to decide between these alternatives. In my opinion, that's ridiculous. Lucien, come on, Mrs. Martial interjected. Lucien was flushed with exasperation and confusion all at once. She turned back and forth toward the pastor and toward Samba Diallo, as if indecisive between the two. It seemed like the same feeling animated both men. In their eyes, on their lips, there was the same air of affectionate disapproval. I didn't mean to incriminate the value of your faith, Lucien said at last with a reassured voice. I only wanted to say that possessing God need not cost a man any of his chances, any of his opportunities. I know well, said Samba Diallo. The scandal of that choice is hard to admit. It exists, though, and appears to me to be a product of your history. Then he added with, it seems to him, a resurgence of severity. As for me, if the direction of my country were incumbent upon me, I would only admit the entry of your doctors and your engineers with great reluctance, and I don't know if at first contact I wouldn't have fought them. Know at least in whose company you would have found yourself in that fight, said Lucien. Your cause is defensible, perhaps. The tragedy is that those who defend it don't always have you and Dad's purity. They adorn themselves with that cause to cover up regressive motives. Samba looked sad suddenly. This passage struck me a lot, probably for obvious reasons, because in Samba we're getting at least a proxy for what Sheikh Amadou Kane's own opinions are about the pastor's proposal. That he would like to have come to Africa, separate from any other vestige of European colonialism, where no military, no doctor, no scientist, no colonial administrator had arrived yet, and just to bring the message of Christ. And he calls this an imitation of Christ. So in his mind, the bringing of all the extra accoutrements, even if they're considered development under the modern European progressive scientific paradigm, he considers them as unnecessary baggage. I wouldn't even bring the least cumbersome, the most useful medicine. I wanted the revelation of which we were the messengers to owe nothing to any but itself, and to be literally for us an imitation of Jesus Christ. Of course, Jesus told his disciples as they went ahead of him to towns, take nothing with you, no bag, no cloak, no money. Stay in the home where you're received, let your peace be upon it, and so on. And Samba's reaction is, I wish you'd have done it. I wish that your idea hadn't been shot down. And then Samba proceeds to say, it's the doctors and the engineers who I'd be inclined to reject, forbid entry to, even to fight off. Because to him, and this is what's fascinating to me, to him, the Christian message, at least at first glance, is far closer to the religious, spiritual underpinnings that he finds essential to life and connectivity and participation with God in the cosmos than all the rest of Western thinking since the Enlightenment. And then, of course, Lucien, standing in for the genuine post-Enlightenment Western modernist, reminds him that in this and every day and age, not everyone who claims to have the same motives is really of pure motives, but would in fact happily join him in his fight against the West for the wrong reasons. And she calls them regressive motives, which of course shows her hand as far as what she values and where she thinks the West stands in relation to Africa. The message of the West to Africa, even to this day, is we are what you want to be, or ought to want to be. You are what we, Africa, you are what we are afraid of being. Our nightmare is being like you. Your dream ought to be being like us. And even advertising in Africa, I was reading more Jim Harry's. Even advertising in Africa, all advertises a modern Western way of life. Even though the average family in Kenya has 8 kids and lives in a hut, the families in the advertisements have 2, maybe 3 kids, a laptop, a car, and so on. And a desk job is what you ought to be looking for. Of course, there's reasons to want a desk job in Africa with air conditioning. But the message of the West to Africa since colonialism and through to this day, even the message, well, yeah, that message is the West is the best because we've got comforts to offer. We have material goods, lots of food. How much have I gone? That's 16 minutes. I think that conversation's enough. There's a few other things that Samba has to say to Lucien that I'll share next time. There's probably like 2 recordings worth left as far as what I've extracted from the book. So, I pray that our presence in Africa among Sheikh Amidou Kane's people can be for us an imitation of Jesus Christ that Sheikh Amidou Kane would welcome as pure and embodying right motives and expressing a right submission and relationship with God that dignifies African people and treats them as equals in our pursuit of the Creator. That's my prayer. All right. Peace.